For the month of October, I knew I wanted to cover a game with at least some horrific qualities. But as we'll soon discuss, F.E.A.R 3 may fit that bill in more than one sense of the word. If you're new to the channel, I previously covered the first and second games in the F.E.A.R series, so I'll leave the links to those two videos if you're interested. As for F.E.A.R 3, despite being a pretty big fan of the first two installments, I completely avoided this one until now, mostly because I never really heard anything good about it. Also, why is Keanu Reeves on the cover? All of the reception I've seen from fans of the series over the years has been resoundingly negative, so I was surprised to see that the game was actually received pretty well critically. So the question really becomes, who's right? Let's check out some gameplay and talk about it. As far as graphics go, let's not mince words here. It pretty much looks like shit. Playing this with the Xbox Series X enhanced graphics seemed to really just enhance the ugliness of the whole thing. First off, what is up with this Silent Hill mist shit? Everything that's not directly in front of you is grainy as fuck. It almost seems like they thought their backgrounds looked bad, so they put this blurry ass filter over everything to try and cover it up. I sincerely don't remember 360 games being this blurry, even from 2011. I don't know if like the 4K has unleashed a previously hidden layer of shit graphics here or what, but it was just hard to look at most of the time, honestly. Things up close don't look terrible, but they clearly tried to shoot for this seemingly Call of Duty inspired aesthetic. I found this design decision particularly strange because it seems like by 2011 this bland graphical style was already going the way of the dodo. From a graphical standpoint alone, I would much rather play this game's predecessor, and I even prefer the first installment visually, which came out in 2005. At least that game had kind of a unique visual style, as opposed to hanging on to the coattails of a dying trend. Due to this new kind of modern military shooter-inspired look, the game really struggles to develop any sense of eerie atmosphere. Even in moments that aren't necessarily supposed to be scary, the first two games in the series were able to capture a pretty unique and unnerving atmosphere. And this is mainly due to things like the visual and sound design of the game. This one just doesn't really have that at all. And that isn't solely due to the lack of a distinct visual style or atmosphere. It's also linked to other gameplay elements which I'll tackle later on in the video. I guess this tonal shift was actually mandated by Warner Bros., the game's publisher, as they wanted something that could compete with Call of Duty. We'll talk more about awful direction as it relates to other elements of the game later, but as far as the presentation is concerned, it absolutely did not do the game any favors. Oh god, I've yet to even mention this dollar store Keanu Reeves as protagonist. Who the fuck is that supposed to be anyways? Wait. That's supposed to be fucking Point Man from the first game? That's right. There is so many issues with this, I don't even know where to begin. But I suppose we'll have to start with this game's clusterfuck of a narrative if I'm going to address any of that. F.E.A.R 2 may have been pretty convoluted in the plot department, and I certainly criticized it for that in my review. But believe me, it looks like Shakespeare compared to this.
You're fucking insane going back to Fairport. You won't last a minute down there. If we don't get you, those freaks will.
So many things just don't add up. At times it feels like none of the people who wrote this shit even played the first two games. Exhibit A, this fucking protagonist. In the first game, Point Man really wasn't a character so much as a manifestation of the player within the game. He never speaks, you never see what he looks like, and he isn't the main focus story-wise. This approach makes perfect sense for that game both atmospherically and from a narrative standpoint. So much so that they used the same formula with Beckett in the second game. In the third game, for some reason, they decided you had to see him all the time in these cutscenes that just feel like they take place in a different world than the rest of the series. Also, on multiple occasions, the game alludes to Point Man being this guy's actual fucking name. What? As far as I'm aware, people just called him that because that was what they said his role was at the beginning of the first game. Why would that be his real fucking name? The point is, he was never really meant to be a character in the first game. Frequently throughout this game though, he does stuff the player can't control, which would seem to imply that they wanted him to have some kind of character of his own. But it just doesn't make sense, especially considering he still doesn't even talk at all. So, the story here follows both Point Man and F.E.A.R from the first game, the latter of which was somehow resurrected and is some kind of spirit or ghost. It seems like nobody can see him but Point Man, despite the fact that he can readily interact with the physical world. It doesn't make any sense. But I decided I'd spend as much time pondering what the ghost rules in F.E.A.R 3 are as the development team did. So, back to the actual plot. Brothers, Point Man and F.E.A.R both want to locate their mother, Alma, who's the creepy girl from the first two games, so that they can deal with her upcoming birth that was initiated in F.E.A.R 2. Now, this doesn't sound too crazy as a follow-up to the second game on its own, but it's really the execution that falls through. First off, like I mentioned before, these cutscenes are awful.
You're fucking insane.
And now that I think about it, with this protagonist and everything else, they just kind of remind me of Hunt Down the Freeman or some kind of other shit you would see on Steam for $3. So yeah, not good. It's not just that, though. I had questions right out of the gate. Particularly, why in the hell would F.E.A.R and Point Man want to work together in the first place? They may be brothers, but I think they pretty much hate each other. Also, they have two different end goals. Point Man wants to stop Alma from giving birth entirely, and F.E.A.R wants to, devour the baby to get stronger or some goofy shit like that. And once again, how the fuck can he eat anything? He's like a ghost or spirit or whatever. Possibly the most egregious plot point, though, for me, is the inclusion of Beckett, the protagonist from the second game. He's only in the game 2 times before he's killed for no reason and serves no real purpose to the story. And the first time you see him, it's just a shitty camera recording. It just seems really lazy to me. You spend a whole game playing as this guy just for them to explode him after one scene in the next game. Despite this story sucking pretty hard for the most part, I did think it was interesting that they tried to explore the relationship between the brothers Point Man and F.E.A.R. The key word there is tried, though, as both characters are really too one-dimensional to gain my sympathy. That being said, though, there was one segment that actually worked quite nicely towards the end of the game, in which the two brothers have to fend off physical manifestations of their past traumatic experiences. Despite this scene being cool, though, it's kind of too little too late as far as the story is concerned. At least their depiction of human resources here isn't far off from reality. So the presentation and story in F.E.A.R 3 aren't great, or good, or even passable, really. But the F.E.A.R series is really known for its intense, detailed gameplay. So how does that hold up? Well, the same Call of Duty mandate by Warner that I mentioned earlier applies here too, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure the second level is literally just an MW2 map, so that kind of tells you all you need to know. I do want to mention that there are some positive side effects associated with the whole copying Call of Duty thing. Most notably, the shooting actually feels really smooth, and for the most part, it isn't bad. The weapons feel good to use, and aiming and maneuvering are much more polished than I was expecting. The combat is also still really gruesome, so at least they got that part right. Perhaps the best thing about this installment is the inclusion of a first-person cover system, which is actually really well implemented. Even better than most modern games. You can actually snap to cover, unlike most FPS games where you just get an often useless lean option from cover. This adds a unique layer to the combat that even the first two games don't necessarily capture. At least, that would be the case if the enemy AI wasn't completely brain dead. The F.E.A.R series, particularly the first game, is known for its groundbreaking advancements in the enemy AI department. Firefights in that game are dynamic and will never really be the same twice. In F.E.A.R 3...
Enemy sighted.
Yeah, I just blew that guy apart and his buddy yelled. I might be overstepping here, dude, but I think it may be a little late for that. So yeah, these guys are fucking morons, more or less. Not long after that occurrence, a guy blew himself up with a grenade.
Everybody down! I'm hit!
And not 5 minutes after that, this giant power-armored boss couldn't find me when I went in this tiny fucking shed right in front of his stupid face. It's not just that either. In the previous 2 games, the combat was well balanced and dynamic. Here it's just wave after wave of these brain-dead Call of Duty rejects. They just keep coming. You think you might get a little break from constant aimless gunfire, but then motherfuckers start coming through portals and shit. These enemies are nowhere near as unique or fun to fight as the ones from the first 2 games. And even the paranormal ones that show up from time to time are not that interesting. There was never like any H.R. Geiger level creature designs in the first 2 games, but there was definitely more interesting stuff than like fast zombies. Are you fucking serious? Like, what game even is this? Why are there fast zombies in a F.E.A.R. game? If that isn't the laziest way to add horror elements to a game, I don't know what is. Besides that, there's these portal-spewing guys who actually look kinda cool, but basically just feed into the recurring gameplay loop of constant combat with mediocre enemies by spawning the assholes in. Then there's these boss guys that get recycled over and over towards the end of the game, whose gimmick is that they can use portals to teleport away from you. Are we still talking about a F.E.A.R. game here? This is an interesting idea, but I used the shotgun on all of these guys and was literally able to stun lock every single one of them. And every time they teleport away, they just show up like right next to you. So what's even the point? Unfortunately, the weaponry that's on offer here isn't much to write home about either, even compared to the last 2 games, both of which elicited complaints from me about the lacking arsenal as well. It just feels particularly dreadful in this instance, considering action and combat were literally ordered to be the main focus by the publisher. These weapons feel pretty good to use, but there just isn't much substance here. In fact, it seemed to me like there could have possibly been even less weapon variety in F.E.A.R. 3 than its predecessors. The reflex mode, or slow motion mechanic, remains essentially unchanged, which is perfectly fine. My only issue with it here is that the more cover-based gameplay that F.E.A.R. 3 implements kind of mitigates the usefulness of this mechanic. That's not to say that I never used it, I just found myself forgetting that it even existed occasionally. The power armor segments make a return from F.E.A.R. 2 here, and they're honestly not that bad. They don't go on too long, and they seem to embody the more action-oriented gameplay in a positive way. Once again, it's not exactly as if they've expanded much on what was done in F.E.A.R. 2, or reinvented the wheel or anything, but I found these segments pretty enjoyable compared to the onslaught of generic enemies that plagues a good chunk of the game. It is worth mentioning before I move on from the combat that this was designed as a co-op game. I didn't get to try out co-op because I don't have any friends, but that does kind of explain the relentless gameplay, and I could see this potentially being fun with a friend. Considering this is a Halloween-flavored review, this game does, of course, place some emphasis on attempting to scare you. With a title like F.E.A.R., F.E.A.R., what is this, Taken? But anyways, with a title like F.E.A.R. 3, this ostensibly seems to be some sort of horror game. And I guess you could call it that, but the emphasis on action really hurt this game in the scary department, at least compared to the rest of the series. There absolutely were some genuinely freaky moments in the game, particularly anything that has to do with this amnesia-looking son of a bitch. But sadly, a lot of this just boils down to either cheap jump scares or showing you frightening things without the necessary context to make them actually succeed in scaring you. Like fucking fast zombies, goddammit. Because of the action-centric gameplay, the game just doesn't take any time to build a tense or suspenseful atmosphere like the prior 2 games. And as a result, the scariest thing here is probably whatever this guy had for lunch. I'm guessing KFC. Actually, I take that back. The scariest part was actually when my controller died without me noticing, and I started inexplicably spinning around in circles. I thought it was some Eternal Darkness kind of shit where the game was playing tricks on me, but disappointingly, it was just a dead controller. Before I conclude here, I do want to say that I don't really think F.E.A.R. 3 is a bad game necessarily, at least when you take it out of context of the F.E.A.R. series as a whole. It's an okay or mediocre game on its own. It's only when compared to the other games that it starts to really fall flat. Mostly I'm just disheartened that the series had to end on this note, with a development team that wasn't able to make the game that they initially set out to. Honestly, I think that's the real reason this is a Halloween episode. You know what wouldn't be scary though? If you considered subscribing to the channel.
You're fucking insane.
If you want to see more stuff like this in the future. I know the end of the year is approaching fast, but as of right now, my goal is to make it to 100 subscribers by that point. I think that would be insane and awesome. Also, leaving a like on the video if you did indeed like it helps a lot, and comments do too. Alright, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.